For years now, Australia has faced a barrage of criticism over its treatment of refugees and asylum seekers. Now it has a seat on the UN's Human Rights Council, and the pressure is intensifying. My guest this week is Alexander Downer, former Australian Foreign Minister and now the country's High Commissioner here in London. How does he justify a policy so widely condemned around the world? Alexander Downer, welcome to Conflict Zone.
Thank you.
2 months ago, Australia got what it lobbied so long and hard for, a seat on the UN Human Rights Council. And after years of sustained pressure over your own human rights record, but you continue to brush off all criticism, don't you?
Well, we are quite happy to answer any allegations that are made, and I'm just about to do that. But we're very happy to stand up for ourselves.
But the record is, I mean, we had the last Prime Minister, Tony Abbott, saying he was sure Australians were sick of being lectured by the UN. The current Immigration Minister, Peter Dutton's on record as calling the whole periodic review process a farce. You don't take kindly to criticism, do you?
Well, I think if people dish it out to you, they've got to expect to generate a debate. They can't expect us just compliantly to agree with every allegation that's made if we don't regard the allegations as allegations of substance. Now, sometimes allegations of substance have been made and we've investigated them. Sometimes we've even set up royal commissions and they have often borne fruit, but it varies a lot. I mean, we basically... You
don't seem to accept the process, though. I mean, why bother to get a seat on the Human Rights Council if you call the process a farce?
Well, we accept the process, the existence of the process. I mean, we wouldn't go onto the Human Rights Council, that's a different thing, but we wouldn't go onto the Human Rights Council if we didn't think that it had some value, and we do think it has some value.
But you turn down routinely, you reject the Human Rights Committee's views.
Well, these are subcommittees. This isn't the Human Rights Council. These are the committees that are set up
of experts. Yeah.
They are entitled to make whatever claims they like about it, Australia, and we are, of course, quite happy to respond either way. Well, sometimes we don't accept them. That's true.
Routinely, they say. In October, Yuval Shani, who's the vice chair of the UN Human Rights Committee, said
well,
you routinely reject the committee's findings.
Yes, I think this is probably on the one issue, and this is on the issue of irregular migration, and we have a very tough approach to that. I mean, I think you'll find that a lot of people in the UN system think that anyone who comes to your shores should be accepted, and they believe that to be a fundamental right, that anybody who comes to Australia's shores should be taken into Australia. We don't accept that. I mean, we have an immigration policy. We take migrants. We have a border protection policy. We have a refugee policy where we resettle refugees in Australia, but we don't take people who try to get to Australia by paying people smugglers. And they think we should, I suppose, but we're not going to.
Your Foreign Minister says you see membership of the Human Rights Council as an opportunity to scrutinise the record of other countries with appalling records and put them subject to greater scrutiny. But what right do you have to give it out if you're not prepared to take it yourself?
Oh, well, we take it. I mean, it's not a criminal offence in Australia to criticise the Australian government or the Australian people. People are welcome to criticise us. We don't shy away from criticism, but as you know with Australians, if you want to dish it out, it's fine. But we will vigorously defend ourselves if we think the defence is worthwhile. Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't.
The controversy over the regional processing centres for refugees and asylum centres, this is where you've attracted the largest amount of criticism. You intercept the refugees and asylum seekers at sea, either tow them back to where they came from or have them processed, mainly on the Pacific island of Nauru or Manus Island, Papua New Guinea. The guiding principle being that people who try to arrive by boat should never, ever set foot in Australia. Is that right?
If you pay a people smuggler and you try to get to Australia that way, and then you can only get to Australia by boat if you do that. If you pay a people smuggler and try to get to Australia that way, we will try to discourage that process. We want to stop it. We do resettle refugees. We're one of very few countries that has a refugee resettlement program. But we don't think it's appropriate for people to pay people smugglers and try and get to Australia.
Don't you? Your government was accused of paying people smugglers itself 2 years ago, handing over wads of cash and telling the people smugglers to take the people back to Indonesia.
Well, try to understand what we are trying to do here. So
you don't deny this.
Well, I'm not sure of the reference, by the way. I'm just the High Commissioner.
Amnesty International accused you of doing this. So they didn't make it up.
I have no idea. But what I can say to you is try to understand what we're trying to do. We have been quite traumatised as a country by seeing scenes on television of boats being wrecked on islands off Australia, in particular Christmas Island off the northwest coast of Australia, and many people drowned. Hundreds and hundreds of people have drowned. We want to stop this process.
You talk about being traumatised by all these people.
No, you have to understand.
See, you might have been a little more traumatised if more people in Australia had seen the kinds of conditions in your processing centres.
Well, we definitely wouldn't have been.
Which the Office of the UN Human Rights Commissioner called unsustainable, inhumane and contrary to your human rights obligations.
And we absolutely reject that. We absolutely reject that as being untrue.
You think they made it up?
I don't know why they... I don't know, it's being too personal, that. I'm not going to say why they made these allegations. But I've told you they
human rights organisations all around the world.
But let me make this clear. These people oppose our policy. So at every turn, they have tried to force us to change our policy. And so, of course, have a lot of these asylum seekers who have been sent to Papua New Guinea or Nauru. Now, what we don't do with these people is send them back refoul. If they're found to be refugees, we don't send them back to the countries they've come from. We make sure they have a place of safety to reside, and that's our obligation under the refugee.
Where they've been beaten by the Papua New Guinea police with steel bars.
Yeah,
and the services and the conditions even in the new buildings in Papua New Guinea are described as severely inadequate.
Well, that's completely wrong as well. It's completely wrong.
How do you know that's wrong?
Well, because the Australian government has built these buildings. I mean, I personally haven't... I've been to Nauru personally, by the way, and the allegations made about Nauru bore no relationship to what I saw when I went to Nauru. No relationship at all.
So why do you restrict the access to these centres? If you've nothing to hide, why do you restrict access to these centres?
Let me explain what's going on here. There is a huge campaign to break our policy, a huge campaign by people who don't approve of our policy, who say we should let all these people in. Well, let me make this clear. No matter what allegations they make, and we are not inhumane, we provide humane conditions, no matter what allegations they make, we are not going to bow to their demands, and we are not going to become the victims of people smugglers.
They're not all pushing you to let them in, they're pushing you to treat them humanely.
No, they are. No, but you see, with the greatest of respect, I'm quite an expert on this topic, the more they can make claims about inhumane treatment, the more they then can put pressure on the Australian government to change its policy, which is the object of what they're trying to do. So they make all these claims about inhumane treatment. You know, they're in prisons.
Including the Australian Medical Association.
Sure, there are people all over the place who support this campaign to make the Australian...
Why didn't you let them in? They demanded access last week to go in and assess the health of these asylum seekers and refugees. Why not let them in?
Because there are doctors. They're in Papua New Guinea and there are doctors there already. We don't need it. I mean, why would they want...
So what have you got to hide? What have you got to hide that you don't let your own Australian Medical Association
It's not hiding, is it? It's not hiding. There are doctors, and there are doctors who look after people who need medical assistance. But why would a group of other people want to go and try to look at what's already being done? Do you know what the answer to that is?
Because they don't trust you.
No, because
the argument is they don't trust you.
No, that's their argument. But the real argument is they want to break the back of our policy. And we're not going to allow that to happen. We've seen what's happened in Europe. We are not going to have our politics thrown into turmoil on the backs of unfortunate people.
It's just an international conspiracy to change your views. It's not an international conspiracy. Your own Senate. your own Senate has reported several times on what they call serious allegations of abuse, self-harm and neglect of asylum seekers on Nauru and Manus Island. This is your own Senate.
Look, we're in a democratic country.
This is your own Senate, so you reject that too,
Absolutely. We're a democratic country. People in the Senate, a lot of people in the Senate, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, and I think, you know, it's probably a good thing that there are mixed views in the Senate, but a lot of people in the Senate oppose the Australian government and oppose the Australian government policy. What's more, the government doesn't have a majority in the Senate, so all sorts of resolutions are passed through the Australian Senate criticising the Australian government.
But you've been warned about the treatment of these asylum seekers and refugees going back years. In 2014, Senate report said the Australian government had failed in its duty to protect asylum seekers from harm. The government did nothing to rectify that. A year later, the committee found...
The government, well, you're being very, very general in these claims. You're not being specific about where this was. So, for example, if you take Papua New Guinea and Manus Island, a whole new body of accommodation has been built there recently. And the accommodation that people were in 2014 has been closed altogether. It doesn't exist anymore.
Between June 2014 and July 2015, the Senate committee discovered cases, 34 instances of serious assault, 75 instances of force used against asylum seekers. The report noted evidence from submitters who believed that harsh and indefinite conditions in the centres represented a deliberate policy on the part of the Australian government to deter people from coming.
Well, we're definitely deterring people from coming. And
by using harsh and inhumane conditions.
Well, we're not actually using harsh and inhumane conditions, and we would completely reject that. But by the way...
Some pretty respected groups tell you are.
Like opponents of the government in the Australian Senate.
Not just,
They may be very respected.
But the UN and respected human rights organisations all over the world.
I'm not denying. I mean, look, the thing to understand is there is a campaign by all sorts of organisations, including members of the Australian Senate,
but you dismiss it as a campaign.
I do dismiss it as a campaign.
It's not just a campaign. Well, they're citing facts.
The Australian...
They have statistics.
They're making claims. They're making claims. And if you drill into all those statistics, and we haven't got time to do that, but if you... Hang on. If you drill into all of those statistics, you'll find that these are over a long period of time. There are all sorts of explanations behind these so-called incidents, some of them major, which have been investigated by the police. You know, where there's a criminal offence, it's obviously been dealt with by the Papua New Guinea police. And where there are minor,
everything's just running perfectly.
And where there are minor
in the most perfect of worlds.
infringements, they're often beaten up out of all proportion in order to try to put pressure on the government to change its policy.
Mr. Downer, one of the worst claims, one of the worst indictments of your system came from a man called Peter Young, who was the psychiatrist who had ultimate responsibility for mental health services in immigration detention. And he likened the government's treatment of asylum seekers in the processing centres to torture. He said the whole setup was deliberately designed to tell people to go back where they came from. If we take the definition of torture, he said, to be the deliberate harming of people in order to coerce them into a desired outcome, I think it does fulfil that definition.
No, well, if he makes his own definition of torture, then he will always win the argument. But of course,
that's a fairly good definition, isn't it?
Of course, we're not torturing
coercing
people by any
into a desired
colloquial
outcome.
understanding. No, we do not want people to pay people smugglers and try to come to Australia that way. And no matter how fierce,
Human Rights Watch addressed that argument a few days ago. They said that the most dangerous mistruth in current Australian politics...
Who said this?
Human Rights Watch. The most dangerous mistruth in current Australian politics is that in order for lives to be saved at sea, other people accused of no crime must be indefinitely and arbitrarily punished offshore.
They're not being punished offshore. They're being placed in processing centres. And if they've been found not to be refugees, they're asked to return to the...
And mistreated in these centres.
They've been placed in process... They're not mistreated in these centres. They're placed in processing centres. They're not jails. They're able to walk out of it and go to the village and go shopping or go to the beach or whatever they want to do in Manus Island, the ones who are in Manus Island, or in Nauru. They have freedom to move around the island. They're not prisons. If they don't like their bedroom, they can be asked to move to another bedroom. I mean, it's not as your, or at least not you, but as some of the
long-term
critics
medical
characterise.
problems,
So
the assault,
well,
the
hear me out.
sexual
Well,
abuse,
well,
that's fine,
well,
is it?
Sexual abuse, none of these things are fine. If there is assault, that's a criminal offence, or if there's sexual abuse, that's a criminal offence. They'll be investigated by the police.
Well,
and if
they
people
may or
have
they
committed,
may not be.
well, in any country you can make that. You can say that's not much of an argument.
You don't know whether Papua New Guinea police are investigating or not, do you?
Papua New Guinea police, presumably, if somebody's assaulted, Papua New Guinea police would investigate it. What's the suggestion?
And if they did the
What's
assault?
the suggestion
and if they
here?
did the assault?
That Papua New Guinea police don't investigate assault. That assault's all right in Papua New Guinea.
I didn't
That's
say
a pretty tough thing to
say
say about Papua
But you're
New
saying
Guinea.
that everything in Papua New Guinea is
I didn't use the word
investigated?
everything. I said these are matters for the police to investigate, and there have been incidents that have been investigated by the police and have been dealt with in the normal way. Where there are criminal offences, but this sort of painting a picture that this whole operation is somehow beyond the law, these operations are entirely within the law of Papua New Guinea or within the law of Nauru. People are free to move about those countries if they wish to. By the way, when the Papua New Guinea government decided to close the processing centre at Manus Island, there were huge protests about the closing of this processing centre, with people in the processing centre saying they didn't want to move.
Yeah, they didn't want to move to new facilities which weren't ready and have been described by UNHCR as severely inadequate.
And they're not. And they are not.
How do you know?
They are not severely, because the Australian government has built them or had them built.
Mr. Downer, if everything was fine, why did the government agree to pay $70 million to settle a class action lawsuit brought by almost 2,000 refugees and asylum seekers from Manus Island, a lawsuit that alleged they had been detained illegally and mistreated? You paid up. Your government paid up without admitting liability.
Well,
but it paid up
exactly
to avoid
right.
going to trial, where it would have had to listen in open court to some pretty damaging claims.
Well, I don't know the details of that. The government didn't admit
Damning
liability.
Evidence.
Well, not admitting liability doesn't, and something that you just yourself said didn't go to court, doesn't constitute damning evidence in law. That's not what damning evidence is. There were claims made, that these claims were settled out of court. And I don't know the details of the settlement, and I don't know that the details of the settlement are widely known in any case. But I personally don't know.
If you'd lost in court, you might well have been laid open to a whole string of other lawsuits.
Well, but it didn't happen, so nobody knows the answer to that
The
question.
immigration minister claimed the trial would have cost tens of millions of dollars, which you ended up paying out in compensation. So a settlement was in the best interests of the Australian taxpayers.
Well, probably.
Anyone believe that?
Well, it certainly would have been a lot cheaper if these, if litigation had gone on for years on end, for sure. Anyway, it was settled, so there you are.
70 million you paid out.
Well, as the immigration minister said...
So you wouldn't have paid out for nothing, would you? If it was just a campaign against Australia,
we may have ended up by
out.
paying hundreds of millions in legal fees. If it had gone on for a very long time, it may have been by far the cheaper solution for us.
What's become clear throughout all this is that taking a tough line with the asylum seekers coming by boat, it's a vote winner, isn't it? Successive politicians have been quick to stereotype the people who've tried to reach your shores, haven't they?
I'm sure that characterisation is exactly right, by the way. No, I don't know that it's particularly... It's a more complex question than that. I think prima facie it's not much of a vote winner. However, there's a different point. We have a very big immigration program in Australia. We take about 200,000 migrants a year. That's as people permanently settling. We take another 100 or so thousand people over and above that as temporary workers and so on. And we have broad public support for our immigration program. And the reason we do is because we decide who comes to our country in the circumstances within which they come. And
do you think it's right to stigmatise the others?
Well, I don't know about stigmatise, but I think that's the right policy. I think that's the right policy because I think the alternative, the policy of chaos, and I'm sorry to say, you've seen a bit of that in Europe, in Germany and Italy and so on. This causes a couple of things. One is, I'm not sure how humane that is, but secondly, it does cause huge political reaction. And you've seen the rise of Alternative for Deutschland and all sorts of other political movements in Europe.
I want to just deal with the stigmatising that's been going on in Australia
I'm just
and the negative perceptions.
You make the point we do this for political reasons or that it's popular. I don't think wrestling with, you know, these campaigns that are run against us over the processing centres and so on is easy or it's particularly popular. I think we've done the right thing. But I think overall, where we have yielded some political dividends is that the public respect the fact that we have an organised and principled immigration policy.
And refugees are routinely described as educationally subnormal, illiterate, not Christian enough, and a bunch of queue jumpers.
Well,
those who've tried to come by boat.
I'm not answerable for everything everybody says, but you know, you'll find in a country of tens of millions of people, people will say all sorts of things.
Well, these are senior politicians. I mean, your former Prime Minister, Tony Abbott, I don't think it's a very Christian thing to come in by the back door rather than the front door, he said. I think the people we should accept should be coming the right way, not the wrong way.
No, and I think he's right that people should come in the right way, not the wrong way. That's a good point.
And the immigration, and what, somehow you're going to vet who's more Christian than somebody else?
Christian, that's taking his use of the word
he said,
Christian
I don't think it's a very Christian thing to come in by the back door.
Well, I don't know about Christian or not, but I do know that coming in the front door rather than the back door is a much more appropriate way to come to Australia.
And the Immigration Minister, Peter Dutton, who said many people won't be numerate or literate in their own language, let alone English. They'd languish in unemployment queues and on Medicare, so there'd be huge costs. There's no sense in sugarcoating that. So they're all thick, are they? Is that the impression that he wants to give?
Well, I don't know about thick. If you're innumerate and illiterate, it doesn't mean you're thick. It means you haven't had the opportunity to learn to read or write.
Educationally subnormal, then.
Well, you haven't had the opportunity to be educated if you're uneducated.
But that's a smear, isn't it?
Well, if people haven't had education, that's a fact of life. I mean, I don't think it's a smear, it's an observation. We, in our country, choose who comes to our country. Understand that. But we do take, and this next year we'll be taking about 18,000 refugees from refugee camps. We resettle refugees into Australia. So obviously we vet these people before we take them. But we don't take people who pay people smugglers and try to get to Australia that way, whatever I don't know about their education qualifications at all. It doesn't matter what their education qualifications are. We are not going to take them if they try to get to Australia that way.
What is extraordinary, Mr. Downer, is that you characterise all the criticism as a campaign. It's either a campaign by people in the Senate, it's a campaign by people
opponents of the government's policy, yeah, sure.
Yeah, by the human rights organisations, by international charities. Suggests a remarkable degree of coordination among hundreds of different groups
I don't know that they're coordinated.
All lined up to attack you with no evidence whatsoever. It's stretching credibility, isn't it?
Stretching credibility. Let me make 2 points. First of all, I don't claim that they're coordinated. Sometimes they are and sometimes they aren't, but all these organisations and people are not particularly coordinated, I suppose.
They come up with the same conclusion, don't
they? They make the same sort of allegations because they are all in their different ways, no doubt, trying to get us to change our policy. I mean, we've put up with this for 17 or 18 years. We're pretty experienced. There has been a huge attempt to change our policy, so once we did. At one stage in 2008, the government decided to change the policy. Then thousands of people started coming to Australia through paying people smugglers, and hundreds of them were drowned on the way. And the public really rebelled against this, and the government came to the conclusion it had done the wrong thing, and it reversed the policy back to the previous policy that we've had. And so
they're not buying this. They're not buying these arguments.
Well, I don't know who's...
They're not buying.
It's not about...
Arguments. The UN isn't buying this.
Well, the UN is a big organisation.
All right, the individual company.
Some people in the UN don't...
Among the 47 members on the Human Rights Council, very few will be buying this.
Well, I don't think that's right, by the way. And by the way, I also would like to make this point. Thinking of Western countries, I think the public throughout the Western world would have a fair bit of sympathy for what we're doing. I don't think everybody would. I don't think a lot of the sort of people who you've been quoting in this interview would, but I do think the mainstream of the community, be they in Germany or in Britain or the United States and in Australia itself, I do think the mainstream of the international, at least Western-oriented international community, would understand the virtue of having a managed immigration program and a managed immigration policy, not contracting some of it out to people smugglers. Most people would think that made good sense. Not everybody. Some people think we should take anybody who wants to come to Australia, no matter how they try to get there.
That's not the
argument. Well, we are
argument.
absolutely not going to do that. Not ever.
Alexander Dana, good to have you on Conflict.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you very much.